morning, everybody. Loving and gracious God, you are indeed the giver of all good gifts, and we thank you today for all your blessing on our great city. For all the residents and the ever-growing community of new citizens bringing with them their unique personalities and skill sets. For council staff members and support members of staff. And I especially hold before you this morning our elected members as they meet to discuss the new budget. I ask that you will bless them abundantly and that they continue to seek your wisdom, guidance, courage and strength. Be with them in their deliberations and help them to be wise in the decisions they make for the good of all those who have placed their trust and confidence in their leadership. Give them insight to lead with integrity, that their decisions may reflect what is right and good. Keep them from short-sightedness and pettiness. Help them to make decisions that are for the good of all, and guard them from blind self-interest. Dear Lord, grant all of us the humility to always seek your will in all that we do and say. Lord, all assembled are meeting today to conduct matters of business. May they hold the Salford City motto in their hearts and minds, that the welfare of the people is the highest law. Guide their hearts and minds in the spirit of fairness, right thought and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon their activities, so that the affairs may reach a successful conclusion. And we thank you for being our source of guidance each day. Dear God, I ask you to bless this meeting with your divine intelligence and help each one here to make the best use of their own. It may be that there is diverse opinion here, yet I pray they mend their differences and reach agreements satisfactory to all. Please share a little of your wisdom with them to help them do right by all concerned. And I never cease to give thanks for your heavenly blessing. Amen.
Do we have any apologies? Thank you. Agreed? Item 2, declaration of interest. Do members have any personal, fiducial or disclosable pecuniary interest that may need to be declared at the meeting? Can I ask members with interest to now declare them? There are none. Item 3, reports to the City Mayor 2019-20 revenue budget and the capital programme. The City Mayor is asked to present this report on 2019-20 revenue budget capital programme, after which we'll permit members to ask questions. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Council. So I'm here today to recommend that Council approve my budget for 2019-20. This is the third budget as City Mayor of Salford that I've been required to deliver to this Council chamber. And it is a city that I'm immensely proud to serve. The City Council, as many of you know, continues to face a significant, challenging financial situation, which impacts directly on the services we are able to deliver to our residents and the people employed in our city to deliver those services. I believe this budget represents, as far as possible, a responsible and fair set of proposals. Let me first outline many of the technical elements of the budget and presenting to Council today. Firstly, I'm recommending an overall budget of £205.241 million for 1920. I'm also recommending a capital programme of 105.682 million again for 1920, using the resources set out in part 3 of my report. In accordance with the formal resolution set out in Appendix 6, I'm proposing a council tax requirement of 107.909 million in accordance with the legislation, and a basic amount of council tax of 1,577.32, an amount for each valuation band in accordance with the legislation. I'm also proposing an amount of council tax for each valuation band in accordance with Section 30 and 36 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992. And I'm also recommending the Council approves the Housing Revenue Account budget for 2019-20 as set out in Part 2 of my report. Finally, from a technical point of view, I'm recommending the Council approves the Treasury Management Prudential Indicators for 2019-20 to 2020-21 as set out in Part 4 of my report. And I want to kind of turn to the main part of what is my speech on budget today. Let's make no mistake that the financial challenges facing this City Council continue to be significant. Despite national government statements to the contrary that austerity is over, I can assure members of this council it is far from over. At a time when we enter yet another spending review period for local government. In the 9 years of this government and consecutive governments, Salford, this City Council, will have had to find £211 million within its budget by the end of 2019-20. I restate, £211 million. That's significant. It's over 50% cut in revenue support grant to this local authority. No council or organisation can lose 50% of its funding without that directly impacting on services. In fact, I go one step further and say that if this was a private sector business, we would have been forced to cease trading, the liquidators would have been brought in, and we would have had to have made all of our staff redundant. In 1920 alone, we have had to find a further saving of £13.06 million in order to deliver a balanced budget here today. I believe we have approached that challenge responsibly and earnestly, and with the mayoral team working all year round to bring to this chamber the budget that's before you today. It is not a challenge that either I or the mayoral team have taken lightly, and in many respects it's not a challenge we've enjoyed or relished in any way, shape or form. Nor do we take any joy from the proposals that we're actually setting out today. We cannot pretend that austerity hasn't hit this City Council and the people of our city hard. The national context behind all of this is a government that continues to conceal the impact of its funding decisions on the public. It's a government that fundamentally does not believe in the redistribution of wealth via taxation, that believes both personal and regional poverty is fundamentally due to people's own actions, and is seemingly unmoved by the depths of misery it has inflicted on the British public after 9 years of austerity. As a nation, we are condemned by the United Nations for policies which are depriving children of food. Our own studies here in Salford Council, working with the University of Salford, have shown how welfare reform is creating hidden young people in our city, living from the proceeds of petty crime, cash-in-hand jobs, and living through spates of homelessness. The government's economic plan has been roundly condemned by the international economic community. Austerity has been criticised by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and by many other international institutions, as well as dozens of leading economists from around the world. It has been condemned also by the government's own Office of Budget Responsibility, the government organisation set up to enact the austerity agenda post-2008 crash. And interestingly, looking at some of our think tanks, we see that the UK economy is 100 billion smaller because of austerity, slower growth every year since 2010, and each person being nearly £1,500 a year worse off. Nationally, our infrastructure, as many of us know within this room, is failing, decimated by years of privatisation and burgeoning bureaucracy, which has arisen from a fragmentation of service provision and a fundamental belief in free market ideology. We are seemingly incapable as a nation of delivering on key projects, be that HS2, Crossrail, smart motorways, and so much more. And this government seems to be addicted to high-status vanity projects rather than the nitty-gritty of infrastructural improvements required up and down this country. For example, to ease traffic congestions on our roads. Salford, as many of you know in this chamber, is the 22nd most deprived local authority in the country. And that's according to the government's own index of multiple deprivation. And since deindustrialisation in the 80s and the 90s, Salford and many former industrial areas like it have genuinely struggled to develop alternative, highly skilled, well-paid economies, as successive national governments have predominantly focused their attention on London and the South East. This is further illustrated by 80% of housing programme funds currently operated through Homes England not being eligible for most local authorities in the north of the country. Combine this with the Tories' cruel and corrupt measures to give money to their own constituencies, the people of Salford have been utterly abandoned by this government. Take the Fair Funding Review as an example, much lauded by the Conservatives after their recent party conference heralding the end of austerity. We were told that this process was designed to make funding more equitable. In fact, it was a cheap excuse to pander to the home counties by enhancing the role of rurality in designating funds and removing considerations of deprivation and real need. Let me repeat that point. It is currently being proposed in the Fair Funding Review that deprivation is no longer considered to be an important methodological factor in allocating resources, with the government favouring an allocation of funds on a per head of population basis rather than actual need. So just to reiterate that, the Fair Funding Review, with an emphasis on fair, language is quite important here, is proposing that it is no longer important to consider relative deprivation in different local authority areas when it actually allocates funds. Dare I say to members of this council, that is fundamentally, morally and ethically not fair. Far from it. Further than this, the government's Fair Funding Review deems it more important to consider the specific needs of rural constituencies which on average have far higher personal and household incomes, i.e. Increased ability to pay higher taxes. That is, considering the needs of those who are truly suffering. As millions queue up outside food banks, children arrive at schools without being fed, the homeless are forced into temporary accommodation, night shelters, with many sleeping rough on our streets, with no place to call home. Our hospitals are falling into disarray, with our doctors, nurses and allied health professionals working under unsustainable pressure. Police are buckling under the pressure of huge increases in crime and diminished resources to put police on our streets and in our communities. And whilst local authorities are declaring bankruptcy, the government seems to be far more concerned with stuffing money into places like Surrey, Cambridge and Buckinghamshire than it is with tackling these urgent issues the country currently faces. And if that wasn't enough, another mechanism for diverting money back into the wealthiest areas of the country has been proposed. It's referred to as the Negative Revenue Support Grant. This is the idea that the wealthy areas that contribute more to the revenue support grant pot should get more out to cancel out the supposed disparity, fundamentally undermining the redistributive rationale of the revenue support grant. It is a policy designed to even further entrench inequality between regions and localities. Given these factors, our approach to this budget has been objective, detailed and open. We have listened to the public through our Talk Budget engagement about the things that matter to them. We have sought to protect vital services for our most vulnerable residents, reflecting our overriding commitment to a better and fairer Salford. We have undertaken a detailed review of all service budgets across the council. This has involved members, directors, our employees, trade unions, key partners and the community and voluntary sector. We have reviewed central provisions and the council's financial reserves and how these can be used to support the projection within the budget and obviously protect vital services. We have sought wherever possible to maximise the opportunities from the new transformational savings, efficiencies, new partnerships and additional income. This is a city I'm immensely proud to call home, and I believe all members share that pride in this council chamber. It's a city with a proud identity, an incredible history and a tightly knit community. A city which, despite the obstacles, is still on a path to growth and success. The decisions this council has taken over the past few decades to invest in regeneration of the city are beginning to pay dividends. Business rates have increased by 2.7 million annually in the last 2 years, council tax by 13.5 million. We've collected 16 million in Section 106 contributions since 2014 and 48 million new homes bonus between 2014-15 and 2019-20. This money is a lifeline. Without it, our services would be hit even harder by the cuts. Ambitious investment in Greengate and New Bailey is building the council's asset base, bringing in an anticipated 7.5 million profit over the next 25 years, plus generating jobs and business rates, building the economy of Salford. Our city council is not simply sitting back and watching as Tory underfunding drives us into decline. We are building and investing for the future of our city and its people. But despite gains, we simply cannot recoup all we have lost through local rates. Local rates, as we know in this chamber, is a regressive form of taxation, with those with least income being expected to pay a larger proportion of what they earn. In line with the expectations and the spending calculations from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and the Treasury, this year we are inevitably being forced to increase council tax by 2.99% and the adult social care precept by a further 1%. As we still wait for the Green Paper on how the government nationally intend on tackling the crisis in social care. This raise helps in covering the increased costs of children in care, which many of you know in this chamber is up 9.1 million since 2010, as well as discretionary support services, winter fuel packages and care for the elderly. These services are vital. Without them, Salford residents would face destitution. High quality health and care services are absolutely vital for our residents and for the economy and social future of this city. This is why I'm including within our budget approach proposals for greater joint working between the Council and Salford's NHS Clinical Commissioning Group. We are fortunate to have an outstanding CCG and hospital within our city. We already have a strong history of working together to improve the quality and effectiveness of health and social care. With the CCG, we want to build on that strong history and have brought forward proposals to create a £600 million integrated fund for health and care, bringing together much of our mutual funding for children, adults, public health and primary care. Our proposals in many respects are groundbreaking. Once again, Salford will be leading the way nationally in innovation and new ways of working to protect vital services for our residents. We're not waiting for the government or anyone else to show or tell us how it is done. These reforms are essential to better protect both health and care services for our residents. By bringing our resources together under clear and robust joint decision-making arrangements, we can achieve improved health and social outcomes for the residents in this city. Commissioning more integrated and proactive care, making sure people can see the right professionals in the right place with the right skills and experience, protecting frontline services, making better use of our limited resources and delivering improved quality, safety and outcomes for patients. This builds on the proven track record through our pooled budget arrangements with the CCG for adults, an arrangement that allows us to realise £1.8 million towards our budget challenges for 2019-20 through an agreed reduction in the Council's contribution. Savings in public health will be made through changes to the re-specification of contracts. We're working to minimise the impacts on residents and ensure public health services continue to support the most vulnerable in our city. I can reassure Council that our further integration proposals do not involve any transfer of functions, responsibilities or staff to the CCG or a new separate organisation. The Council will continue to hold its responsibilities for the provision, safety and quality of children's services. We are doing all of this and ensuring we can make the most of the skills, the expertise and the capacity of both organisations and make the best possible investment decisions to ensure we keep the right high quality health and care services in our city. Last year I spoke of a national crisis in funding for children's services, and I noticed only yesterday in the national press this was again highlighted, the chronic underfunding of children's services up and down the country as a consequence of austerity and local government cuts. And 12 months on from last year's budget, I have to say to this Council, nothing has actually changed. The impact of welfare changes, new burdens on Council as a result of government policy and legislative changes, and the growing number of children in our city continue to mean growing pressures on the Council's budgets for children services. Despite clear evidence from Salford and councils up and down the country, the government continues to fail to provide anything like adequate levels of funding. We invested an additional £4.5 million in our services for children in 2018-19 in recognition of the significant pressures faced in order to meet the needs of children and their families. This was a decision to invest in our residents. Despite this investment, the area of our budget continues to face ongoing budgetary pressures and challenges. But we'll continue to make decisions for children, young people and families based on a professional assessment of need. Whilst the service will contribute £1.9 million of savings as a result of proposals made today, we'll continue to prioritise early help and prevention and high-level statutory intervention where that is needed. Our investment in core services such as street cleaning, highways maintenance, the upkeeps of parks in the city and our fantastic open spaces, leisure, planning and building control will still continue, supporting the essential fabric of public life within the city of Salford. These are all things that residents have told us that matter to them. We continue to invest in our libraries and leisure facilities in order that Salford residents can enjoy the leisure and cultural offer which contributes to health and well-being and makes Salford such a vibrant place to live, work and play. And we are taking advantage of capital investments to purchase electric vehicles for our operational services, such as for dog wardens and pest control, investing in better air quality and reducing carbon footprint from the council's operations. Every organisation needs strong enabling support services, enabling the front line to focus on delivering. But those support services need to be as effective and as efficient as possible. This is as true for Salford City Council as it is for any large organisation up and down the country. We are committed to reviewing transactional services across the organisation, maximising the use of technology and automation to realise efficiencies and enabling staff to provide greater face-to-face support to residents, something we know is important to residents. And at the core of the organisation, we will continue to provide effective financial planning and stewardship, workforce and organisational development, digital development, a cohesive communication strategy and an effective management of legal democratic elections and strategic procurement functions. These functions will continue to work cohesively so as to ensure we can protect investment in frontline services. After 9 years of austerity and consistent cuts, this year's budget is the hardest and most painful to date. We have been cutting to the bone for several years now, and many decisions have been taken from necessity rather than choice. We could not deliver the high level of service we provide to our residents if it was not for the commitment, pride and passion of our own council workforce. They too have felt the impact of austerity. Throughout this time, our staff have remained totally committed to the residents of this city. For that, I thank them for their dedication, their commitment and work within this city council and for the people of this city. They understand and appreciate that the welfare of the people is indeed the highest law in our city. This, as I'm sure many of you in this chamber will agree, is a horrendous reality to be faced for a local authority. It is through all of this that we work together, and it's incumbent upon us all to set our priorities and our corresponding budget locally. So I ask the council to agree the budget before them today. Thank you very much.
Questions? Yes.
Second the budget and reserve the right to speak.
Any questions? Councillor Turner. Let's start with
Yeah, she's comments,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Can we do a comment?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's kind. Thank you,
Mic-
Chair.
Is the microphone on?
Can I start by thanking Not on.
It's on now.
Sorry, I'll start again. Can I thank the City Mayor firstly for all the nice positive things he said about the government of this country. It's much appreciated and it's very predictable. The other thank you I would like to make is for all the officers that have been involved in producing this balanced budget. They have worked tirelessly both with the ruling group and with the opposition, and we thank them for that. We on this side have gone through the revenue budget both in scrutiny and one-to-ones with officers, and we've come to the conclusion that we've been asking the same questions as the ruling group have asked, and of course in turn we've been getting the same answers. But I again think that this has been very, very difficult this year, understanding things like the revenue budget, treasury management, earmark reserves, capital, etc., etc. For a mere mortal like myself, I find it very, very confusing and very difficult to understand, but I've done my best. It's disappointing that the council tax is to rise again, approximately, I think, round about the 5% when you add in the police and the Andy Burnham, who I believe is come visiting here later. It is difficult, and with the government using council tax as a means of funding areas that, in my opinion, and it's no secret, with the City Mayor I agree, I do think that some of these things should be funded nationally and not borne by the council taxpayer. But all in all, it has been a very difficult job in balancing the budget. Mind you, I have to say that I do remember, even in the days prior to 2010, I don't remember the council tax ever going down. It always went up, and I presume that was in the good old days, but it always went up year on year, right? Can you let me, I've sat and listened to your city mayor, your leader, quite politely. I would expect the same. You might not agree with what I'm saying, and I'm sure you don't. But then again, I don't agree with what the city mayor's saying. But I don't get up and start chittering about with it. Very immature, a bit like his notices, really. But anyway, I won't comment on that. Good. Anyway, we started off with required savings totaling approximately 13 million. And some areas are a lot more challenging than others. Overall, we have a balanced budget. It must be noted that 5 million of the savings are from one-offs, which really means that it can't be raided again or taken from that part again. That's how I read it, but I could be wrong. Whether the savings are achievable, and here's hoping that they are, and that they're thereabouts at the end of the financial year, they usually are, give or take a few scares. The capital programme is made up with some investor save, some unsupported, some specific grants. The first two, whatever you call it, is borrowing. Whatever you call that, it is borrowing. So it has to be paid back. By far the largest, I noticed, was the embankment. Now, we are assured by officers that although there is a risk, and personally I see many, it's a large amount of money, and interest presumably will be borne by the revenue account. But Councillor Holmes will tell me if I'm wrong. As I say, I'm a mere mortal, and he's been at it a lot longer than I have. So I respect his judgment on that. But only time will tell. By far the most interesting and somewhat confusing item that reared its head late in the day, and maybe that's me that I didn't realise, but was this £85 million called earmark reserves. This isn't to be confused with the general reserve, which is around about 13. This is a reserve called earmark reserves, and that's where your 5 million, or most of it, came from, these one-off payments. And this has baffled me somewhat. Even after talking to officers, I wasn't quite sure what money, whether it was money in the deposit account or what it was. But anyway, the thing is, this coming year, we've got to have a closer look and understand that better. 30 seconds, right. Can I finish by saying that the greatest threat to our great country is a Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn. I am confident that the people of this country will never let it happen, and everyone thinks that it will is in another planet. Thank you very much for your tolerance.
Councillor Robin Grado.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted to start off on a positive note, but before I do that, I really must make one or two other comments. And I'm really surprised that, well, in fact, I think the speech we've just heard from the City Mayor is the same speech we heard last year, with one or two little variations to it. But by and large, we heard the same speech last year and the same speech the year before. What actually surprises me is some of the contradictions that we've heard. During the first part of his speech, well, about a third of the way through, he talks about hospitals in disarray, gives the impression that health services, is falling apart, etc., etc. And yet we move on towards the end of his speech, where he talks about how well we're doing in Salford, with Salford Royal, the new partnership with the CCG, etc. So we have all the negatives to start with, and then we have the positives about how well we're doing in Salford. And if there can be that much contradiction there are very many other areas of the speech where there are contradictions. Councillor Turner mentioned the rise in rates, or council tax as they became, and there were a few mutterings from the chamber. Certainly, I remember not very long ago when we had 12 years of Labour government together with a Labour council, when cumulatively over that period of time we had rises of up to 80%, up to 80% in rates. That's how you managed your budget, right? You managed it by overspending, and then by clawing it back for the people of this city. And that had to stop, and that's why the government has had to take the measures that it's taken. Don't let's forget that your Treasury spokesman, when he left office, actually said the cupboard was bare. That's a fact. That's a fact. You may not like it, that's a fact. Now, I did say I wanted to start off by being a bit more positive. I did have to respond. I did have to respond to the City Mayor on those points. And on a positive note, City Mayor, I attended, as you know, the breakfast meeting last week, and I was really pleasantly surprised. It was about the review of the last year of the social impact report, and it was an extremely good meeting. And I think the first thing that surprised me, that after the City Mayor had got to the end of his speech, I realised that he had not mentioned the word austerity once in that speech. And in fact, I actually congratulated him after the meeting for not having reverted to those things. And I think it was quite clear that the word austerity couldn't be used in that context because of the amount of successes that we've had in this city over the last 12 months, both on our own and in partnership with the university. And I'll just mention one or two of those of what we've achieved. £96 million spent with Salford-based employers. £83 million paid in wages by the council to Salford residents. 62% of staff are Salford residents. Additional apprentices taken on this year by the council. All staff paid at least a foundation living wage. Mr. Ware, we're to be congratulated on what we've achieved in this city, even with the cuts, which you try and keep pulling the city down by mentioning in these silly posters that you put up. We are achieving, in spite of all that, we are achieving successes. And I think that's good. The university itself is the fastest growing university in Greater Manchester, and the fifth greatest growing university in the whole of the country. We have 170,000 alumni throughout the country, 2,660 people employed, £591 million pulled into the economy of Greater Manchester, £390 million gross value added to GM's economy. I can go on, Mr. Mayor, we're talking about hundreds of million pounds of extra investment, either in this city or certainly within Greater Manchester. That is to be welcomed, and yet we heard nothing about that this morning from the City Mayor. I'm coming to an end in a moment, Chair. Having demonstrated how we are making big improvements, can I just turn to the budget? There are two things that stand out in this budget, and which certainly as an opposition we are extremely concerned about. One is the capital expenditure, and it's already been referred to by Councillor Turner in terms of the, in fact the figure wasn't mentioned, but over £72 million of capital expenditure on 2 buildings. I do not think it is any part of this council to take part in speculative office development. Right? If it's private developers, I've heard the Labour Party say this many times over many years, right? You shouldn't get involved in speculative development. It's a capitalist type of dealing with things. So I really do want to be honest. And the final thing, Mr. Mayor, that I will mention is the £85 million of reserves. Right? I find it very difficult, and we've scrutinised the figures. We've not come up with an answer yet, but we feel, in fact, that there is a lot of money within there that could come out and be used for the benefits of the city. Now, it's because of these reservations, Mr. Mayor, because of these reservations, that we on this side do not feel, excuse me, do not feel that we can support this budget. There are too many holes in it, there are too many facts that remain unanswered in our opinion, and we cannot therefore support it.
What's the alternative?
Use some of the 85 minutes.
Thank you. I must remind members, this council meeting is going out live. I've had a number of comments from high school children and adults. Remember, this is a civilised meeting. It's not a bear garden. Thank you. Councillor Paul Wilson.
Sorry, it's Councillor Merry.
No, Councillor Paul Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. We all know there's been cuts to central government funding, and it does lead to difficult choices. However, I have concerns with the Labour Party policy to continue the capital programme as it is. I share the concerns which have just been outlined by Councillor Garrido. I also have concerns about the capital receipt programme. And on Monday night in Labour Group, when questioned, Councillor Bill Hines referred with vagueness to the question around the capital receipts and the difference between, and it sounded like a best guess estimate. Well, that's not good enough for Salford people. The proposed budget set out by the City Mayor shows that Salford people, normal, ordinary, working class social people, are being neglected, allowing care workers to be paid less than a living wage, closing a children's home, and more staff losses, to name but a few areas impacted, and all whilst paying for expensive office blocks on the outskirts of Manchester. Funding a failing stadium, paying millions of pounds on interest and capital projects that ordinary Salford people will not benefit from, and all whilst hiking up council tax. Paul Dennett will argue that the cuts are the fault of austerity, but when his administration has failed year on year to effectively collect council tax and business rates, it shows a lack of leadership and has significantly contributed to the cuts in services and these increases we see today. These cuts are coming at a time where the senior leadership of the council have colluded to stop the redevelopment of an historic building in Salford, despite the support of ward councillors, local community and planning officers. I've heard it said inappropriate pressure was put on officers to refuse a scheme under delegated powers. And when that didn't work, pressure was put on the planning panel and it didn't receive planning permission. I've even heard that the chair of the panel, enraged at the position he was put in, told officers, and I quote, "Never put him under that position again." Sorry, Councillor Hines, do you have something to say? The Mayor, with senior officers, has let down Salford residents by their actions. These actions have consequences and ultimately cost hard-earned taxpayers in our city the money they will have to pay for the inevitable legal action. Every penny that this council has to pay out to settle this and numerous other cases is because of the conduct of the senior leadership. There are those within this chamber, within Salford Labour, who will say that I'm doing this because I'm a Blairite, a Red Tory. They've said it before, and I'm sure they'll say it again. But I'm not the one who voted to sell off council houses. I'm not the one who voted to cut disabled transport. I voted against these right-wing policies, while these so-called fake socialists voted to affect ordinary Salford people. I've been attacked in the corridors verbally and told, "Why are you voting against the council? Why have you called notice him?" I've done that because I'm a real socialist, and I've done that to protect Salford people. During my time as a councillor, I've proved to be effective at getting results for the people of Salford, and I've forced the Mayor to change policies on things such as building homes in the public park and allowing hundreds of homes to be built on recreational land. But by standing up for Salford... proposal was to build homes in a park. There was a declaration.
There was no proposal. We were engaging in a consultation with the residents and the community and the ward councillors. There was no proposal from the executive and from this city council. It's a lie. Retract.
There was no engagement with ward councillors, and I will move on. I know I'm not I've been subjected to bullying from within the party, punished by being blocked to stand again, whilst I was dealing with personal health issues. And those within the Labour group know exact detail of those health issues. And this is all whilst I'm witnessing anti-Semitic behaviour being brushed under the carpet by those in charge of Salford Labour. I know I'm not alone, and whilst serving as Labour councillor, I've served with other honest, hard-working councillors who I know are wrestling with their own conscience as if they can stay in the party. My motivation for being a councillor was simple: to make a difference for the lives of Salford people and try and change the party from within. Well, the price I've made for making these comments is I must now resign from the Labour Party, a party that I've tried to work within, and I now intend to serve the rest of my term as an independent councillor. And I will work in alliance with anybody who feels let down by the current system and anybody who wants to make a difference to Salford people. I urge others in this chamber to vote against the proposed budget and send a statement to the people of Salford that we are here to represent them and force the City Mayor to review his capital programme and urgently address the poor collection rates and council tax rates in Salford so we can create a better, fairer Salford. Thank you.
Councillor John Merry.
Well, having heard that, I'm because what I heard there was not an example of somebody being bullied, but somebody attempting to bully people in this chamber by telling lies and smears about other people in this chamber. For example, he made a disgraceful attack on the chair of the planning committee without any evidence to back it up. He talked about the closure of a children's home. Well, council may ask, has he been to see anybody about the closure of that children's home? Because if he had, he would have found out that that particular home was not suitable for its purpose and that it enabled us to use money elsewhere in the budget to serve the real children of Salford rather than those that he fictitiously has invented in terms of a particular problem. He made vague statements about anti-Semitism. He knows that I have fought anti-Semitism not just in this party, but right across the city. I was delighted to be triumphantly re-elected just 2 years ago in my ward with the full support of the Jewish community, and Councillor Saunders is nodding his head. I actually prefer to believe him, Councillor Saunders, right, who is my political opponent, but actually believes in decency, rather than someone who comes here to make smears and accusations about the people who we try and represent. I just want to deal briefly with some major points that have been made. First of all, Robin Gurried, I was grateful to your hymn of praise to Salford. Of course, this shows what a successful administration, a successful Labour administration can achieve in the teeth of opposition from the Conservative government. Secondly, I want to draw people's attention to a particular proposal that is in here relating to children's services. We originally proposed that from this April we would delete 5 posts in children's in early years for senior practitioners. I'm able to say that despite the fact the consultation hasn't finished, I will be asking the strategic director when the consultation has finished to confirm that those posts will not disappear until next April. This will give us time actually to prepare the service, to actually look at alternatives in terms of income and in terms of how we actually run the service in the future. So I will be asking the strategic director to look at that and to come to that conclusion as a result of the consultation that has taken place. I just want to correct a few facts, right, having dealt with the rather nonsensical statements that I heard from over there. In Councillor Turner's statement, he obviously doesn't have as long a memory as some of us in this council. Actually, we have not increased the council tax year on year, despite your statement. In fact, myself and Councillor Lancaster had a long discussion in one particular year, and we came up with a zero council tax increase as a result of prudent management of the city's resources. And what we have now is we have a smash and grab raid that is going on in terms of the people of Salford. And there's another Yiddish word which Councillor Saunders may recognise called chutzpah, which is basically to have the nerve to make some of the statements that the Tories have made today. They are engaged in a raid on the money that Salford receives from the government. They are proposing to shift it away from measuring deprivation, which is one of the ways in which the money comes to us by government, towards what's called rurality. And just to make it doubly clear, they also don't want areas with a large amount of countryside, who happen to be Labour authorities, to get that money either.
30 seconds.
Right, so they've qualified it. Can I just conclude, right, by saying, look, this is a good budget. I thought the City Mayor's speech was excellent. It delivered for the people of Salford. And unlike people who get up in this chamber and make statements about it, we actually do the business for the people of Salford, and we look forward to continuing in stewardship. Thank you.
Councillor Bill Hines.
Thank you, Chair. Was that? I didn't say it. It's up to me when I get up, isn't it? I did say that, but it's up to me when I... Not closing the debate. Well, first... Chair, first of all, Councillor Wilson, absolutely disgraceful. A man that came to our Labour group on Monday, but didn't have the courage to say what he has said today. All that means, he wants to say publicly, because we're on the screen, taking advantage of this position, when he didn't have the courage to say what he said today on Monday. An absolute disgrace. And I believe that Councillor Wilson should move from that chair now over there. That's what I believe. And by the way, Councillor Wilson, yes, he comes forward, he put his name, he wanted to stand again this year, but he had every opportunity, and we can prove he had every opportunity.
Point of order. I don't want to get into the details. Councillor Hines, the rules are you sit down when I make a point of order. Don't stand there criticising me when you know how serious those health issues were. And I wish those health issues on nobody. So please don't take that approach.
I did not know his health problems. I understood he mentioned health problems. I did not know. He has never come forward.
Councillor Hines was in that meeting for a Labour group. This is about budget.
Councillor Hines has put a point forward, and there's a point of information regards that, and that is allowed in the Constitution. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I did not know about his health problems or what they concern. I understand he mentioned health problems. He had every chance to put in his form. He did not do that, and therefore he didn't get on the panel. So, if he had have done, would he have been speaking and mentioned that he was going to ask people not to support this budget today? I doubt it. But anyway, I've got that off my chest, and we'll now talk about Robin Garrido's again, on Robin's. You know, Robin Garrido, who's now saying to the people of Salford, or this body today, to vote against the budget. This is a man representing a party that didn't even come with an alternate. Where's your alternate to our opposition to what we're saying today? There is none. There was none last year. I don't think there was one 2 years ago, was there? Yeah. Absolutely pathetic.
There wasn't another move by this group last year. There's another move. That we need to dig further into, we are unable to support it this year. That doesn't mean that we haven't looked at it carefully. An amendment is not appropriate until we have had the opportunity to further dig deeply into the figures.
I think last year that they supported our budget, quite frankly. There may have been an amendment the year before, but certainly not last year. Anyway.
Well, I'm sorry. We moved an amendment. He must retract that. We moved them, and if we need clarification, perhaps his officers can pull up the minutes from the council meeting last year, and that will actually prove that we moved the amendment. So,
I can remember last year they supported our budget. Anyway, let's look where we are as far as Robin Garrido and the Conservatives are talking about. He talks about the mayor having contradictions. He talks about the mayor mentioning the point that we are the 22nd most deprived area in the country, which we are. But the contradictions then, he says, are that the mayor's talking that how things are doing well. I can remember Robin Garrido and the opposition opposing our capital programme, which really means that where we are doing well, it is because of the money that we've invested in the capital programme. And it's despite the fact that we have worked under austerity for the last 9 years. And Councillor Garrido, the mayor, did mention the word austerity. He mentioned what we were doing despite austerity. So he did use that word. So you're wrong there. I think you've got a short memory.
I'm sorry.
Oh, here we go again.
I referred to a breakfast meeting last week at university in which a speech was given by the city mayor, and he did not.
Mr. Mayor. Point of order. It is not a point of personal explanation to stand up and talk about disagree about what another person said. This is an abuse of a point of personal information. I think we've had several abuses of that today already.
Mr. Chair, as the mayor has said, once again, after nearly 9 years of this Conservative government, we're still struggling. And these papers that Robin Garrido criticises are factual. They're factual. And therefore it just shows the difficulties, once again, we are having. I can remember getting up in this chamber in 2010, when we believed at that time that perhaps the Conservative proposals were based on a 4-year span. Here we are after 9 years, nearly 9 years, of going through the same issues. And when the Conservatives, I took part a few weeks ago with the finance officer in a conversation, telephone conversation, with the Secretary of State and his minister. Half an hour. For the first quarter of an hour, he did nothing but the pair of them to congratulate themselves. And then talk, the next quarter of an hour, how they were committed to local government and the monies that were going in. Well, we know, as the Mayor has said, if money is coming into this city now, it is because of the local taxpayer. I hope I get a bit longer for all the interventions, Chair. If you look, and it's hard to see, so I'll show it to the opposition. The blue line, government funding since 2010. See how it goes down? Then revenue spending power. See us that in the middle, and then you see council tax, right, shooting up there. That's where it's being financed from. And you have the nerve to criticise us after 9 years of doing that. I think it's an absolute disgrace, especially when you've no alternative to come with.
Gina Reynolds. Councillor Gina Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on some of the health stuff and contradictions that Councillor Garrido alluded to. Quite frankly, Robin, the integration is stopping us from going over a cliff. There are issues in the health service, and I welcome the further integration, but even with us creating new models of care, like our new urgent care team, which is doing some marvellous work in the community, and our enhanced care teams, in the long term saving money within that integrated system. But we need funding. We need funding for integration to work. So let's look at that funding. Adult social care grant, a pittance, 2.2 million to cover pressures in 1920. It's wholly inadequate. Look at public health. We've lost 3.5 million in public health since 2015. Spending per head on prevention nationally is on track to reduce by a quarter from 2015 to 2020. We know that the wider determinants throughout the system are very important to our public health and prevention agenda. It's not rocket science. If we're struggling financially in all our directorates across the city, across this council, it's going to stop and prevent our ability to improve people's health, to us put in place those preventative measures. So yes, we have got a bit of a crisis in the health and social care system. And as Paul mentioned, 2 years overdue, the Green Paper on adult social care. That paper should be looking at a solution to sustain our social care system, which is needed in conjunction with our health system. But the Tory government, they're overconsumed with Brexit. They don't want to look at the issue until the Brexit situation is sorted. So that's been on the back burner. And as I say, 2 years overdue. So yes, I'm sorry, there is an issue. We're doing our very best in Salford to mitigate these issues. And some of that is down to our integration, and I welcome the further integration going forward.
Councillor Eleanor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't actually going to speak today, but a couple of comments have forced me to speak, so to speak. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the City Mayor and the officers on what I would say is a damage limitation budget, and well done to all concerned, and I fully support it. Now, Councillor Robin Garrido, I don't know what it is, but whenever he speaks, I say, oh, I've got to get up and say something. I think he might have this effect on a few other people around here too. Anyway, my point to Councillor Robin Garrido, he was going on about Labour councillors mismanaging money and being useless with money. Well, I think I recall that it was Northampton Council that went bankrupt or almost bankrupt a couple of years ago. I think they're a Tory council. And the other point on a very serious issue, as far as I'm concerned, is the anti-Semitism issue. Now, I've been here almost 3 years. The last 2 years, apart from my job, has been the worst 2 years of my life, with my dad passing on, and as you all know, intimidation from a councillor who was deselected. And I have to say that my colleagues from Labour have been absolutely amazing to me and supportive, and without them I'd never have got through it. I cannot say that one of them is a bully, and even more importantly, I have not had or heard one anti-Semitic comment in those 3 years. In fact, if anything, I've had interest from other councillors wanting to know things about what the Jewish people do and say and what do we eat. And I just feel, I have to say that there has not been any anti-Semitism certainly directed against me, or I'm sure that Councillor Saunders can say against him, since we've been in this chamber. And I think it's so unfair that what's going on nationally has just been brought into this chamber today, when it most certainly does not apply here in Salford. Thank you.
Councillor Karen Garrido.
Right, back to the budget. Right, I did have a number of points to make. One of them, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to raise again. It's on the reserves and it's on page 37 and it's 1.18.4. I have to say, I'm going to read it out because an assessment of the outturn expenditure for 2018-19 currently shows that an anticipated variation service expenditure of 5.13 million against a budget rising through demand pressure. The council has identified, and this is a bit, central resources, remember that, to meet the overspend. It goes on to say, I'm not going to read all the rest, the balanced budget is expected to be achieved without a call on the general reserves, leaving the 13.2 million at March 2019. So guess what? I went to have a look at what central reserves were, and the central reserves are resources are earmarked reserves. Earmarked reserves, not resources, reserves of £85 million. £85 million. That is an astounding amount. We've not just got 13.2 million in reserves, we've got an additional £85 million. I know it's earmarked, and that's been the problem, trying to get down to what it's been earmarked for and what the figure is for 2019. What is this? The figure we've received for 85 million was 2000 up to March 2019. What is the figure, 2018. What is the figure for 2019? I don't know. And that's the reason why I'm absolutely astounded that this, and I know it's in the account, it's on a very, you'd have to read the whole lot, not just the ones that are here, right? It doesn't say anywhere about this reserve of 85 million pounds. I'm really shocked about this because we're raising council tax. We see all this about funding, that we're not getting it. We're sitting on 85 million pounds. Tell me how that can be. How you as backbenchers, right, can sit there and not disagree with not using this 85 million in some way. You've used 5 million of it. You've used, the year before you used 2 million of it. You're using it, right? But who knows knows about it. I have to say, I'm unbelievably annoyed about it. But can I go on to the capital programme? Councillor Hines would not want me to go through another budget without commenting on the unsupported borrowing and the business to save. It goes up every year. I've been hammering on at this for at least 10 years, Councillor Hines.
Too long.
10 years, and it goes up and up and up. You are borrowing for our children and our grandchildren to pay back for what you're doing now. It has to stop. Somebody, Treasurer, City Mayor, you need to look at this and bring this back under control. We are absolutely, I can't remember the exact figure, but it is unbelievable amount of money, right? Now, I just need to make one more point, right? It's about the 100 embankment, right? We're not in the business. We can't be as a councillor. We can't be speculative, right? Can you imagine how many homes that money would have built instead of an office block? Why do we not borrow to build homes, right? Well, you're borrowing 72 million to build an office block. You're borrowing, how can you sit there and laugh about buying? Borrowing 72 million to build an office block. 30 seconds. Right, and I just need to say one final thing, right? Why did we not stand up, Mr. Mayor, about, City Mayor, about the Greater Manchester Mayor increasing his budget, right? Why do we not, as Labour members, right, on that committee, stand up and tell him he wasn't having any more rises? And before you say, yes, it was my government that brought it in, but Birmingham's Labour group voted against his budget. I don't see us ever voting against Greater Manchester. And just one final thing. Thank you for being honest and standing by your principle. I don't agree with everything, but Councillor Wilson, well done. And I think somebody should apologise, Councillor Hines, for the word that you used, because that needs to be sorted out. But thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
No. Sit down. Have you finished? Let's take a break.
We'll take a break and finish off. It's 10:45. Okay? At 11. Okay. Yeah. By that clock over there. Not all clocks are the same. No, all clocks are the same. We like the faces, right?
Still questions now?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, so we'll to Francis' question. No, sorry, it's Councillor Saunders.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I say how delighted I am to see Councillor Stone back in her place. I'm sure we'll all welcome that. Can I also take the opportunity of apologising for cancelling this meeting yesterday. I like to think I have some qualities, but tech savviness is not one of them. So apologies. I genuinely hope that nobody has not come this morning because they thought that the meeting was cancelled. Now, far be it from me to intrude upon internal Labour wrangling this morning, but I would just like to say a few brief points. Firstly, let me just clear up about the anti-Semitism situation. I'm not going to comment on the Labour Party as such, but the council, Salford Council, as Councillor Merry says, are indeed very supportive of the Jewish community, and we are grateful for that. Indeed, on Saturday morning, ceremonial mayor, before his ball in the evening, will be joining myself and the chief rabbi in consecrating a rededicated synagogue in my ward. So we are grateful for the support of the council itself. Just a couple of brief points. Firstly, I note in the report, I have tried to read through the 180 pages, I note the comments on bins, recycling, fly tipping, both the council's own comments and the comments that came in from the public, as well as the comments on the Salford Healthy Communities and the letter received by local GP. The Mayor and Councillor Reynolds will know that I have also lobbied on behalf of that group, particularly with the measles epidemic so prevalent. I think any cuts in health prevention is regrettable. Now, a couple of points. Firstly, this morning it was announced that nobody has been found to come in from the private sector to rescue the 5 Salford nurseries. This is literally hot off the press, and the council have agreed to continue funding them. I actually have in my possession a leaflet from the Unison, which I think 1 or 2 people here are familiar with, actually encouraging people to join them, and one of the reasons they state is because we have actually forced Salford Council to revise their policy on this respect. There is no reference at all in the 180 pages to these nurseries, so I wonder if the Mayor could mention that. Now, I had a little inkling that the Mayor might talk about austerity and cuts. So I actually got in touch with a Conservative central office and asked them if they could give me some information to put from the other point of view. And I'd just like to read a couple of very brief points. It is quite a long email that I got back, but it says as follows. Salford will get an extra 6,466 million 0.779, etc., from the local government finance settlement, working out £55.27 per dwelling, representing a 3% rise on the year before, a real terms increase and more than the national average. I can show this to anybody who wants. This comes from Conservative Central campaign headquarters. Yeah, okay. It talks of the Rural Services Delivery Grant, which might be why Surrey and Buckinghamshire seem to get a better deal. They talk of encouraging councils to build the homes that communities need by investing £18 million more in the new homes bonus. And finally, they end on a political point, which says Labour voted against the local government finance settlement, showing they will always put politics before people. 223 Labour MPs voted against giving councils a real term increase in funding to 46.4 billion for next year, which will be another increase to provide quality local services. Okay, well, you know, I can show you chapter and verse. Finally, Mr. Chair, if I can just say that as a member of the Equalities and Diversity Committee, I think it might have been good to refer to our Section 151 officer as she, or at least in a neutral gender way rather than the rather patronising he. And if I can end with one final point, the monitoring officer once told me off for including officers in an email which she deemed to be political.
Mr. Chair, how does that square with officers having to come to work and sit in a chamber, etc., full of very political posters? Thank you.
First of all, Chair, a serious allegation was made earlier on about a planning decision. It is unfortunate that the chair of the planning panel is not here to defend himself or to defend the actions of the panel. A planning application was turned down. It was turned down for sound planning reasons. This was a planning application. I'm sure that maybe Councillor Greed or Councillor Clark will remember, for a group of family homes with no amenity space, 5-bedroom family homes with no amenity space, no gardens, nowhere for children to play, grouped around a car park next to a cement works. It was turned down on grounds of amenity, very sound planning reasons, and I just need to put that on record, that whatever pressures were put on members, and there were pressures put on members, and anyone who's a member of the planning panel knows that there are always immense pressures on members of the planning panel for every decision that they make. The decision was made on very sound planning grounds, and rightly so, in my view. I wonder if I could just address the issue of the earmarked reserves, because this City Council is not an innovation, it's not something that has been introduced this year. I recall when I was the lead member for finance, I think it was at about £60 million, but it was a big figure of earmarked reserves. And you know, they are there, it's available to members of the council in the documentation to understand that. But it's really important it is not the council sitting on money. You know, it isn't the council sitting on money. Earmarked reserves are there because of the guidance that we get through CIPFA and central government about the prudential use of our resources. So, for example, we know that every year, and this is an area that relates to my portfolio, we know that every year there will be tripping claims on the City Council, some of which will be successful. And so we need to take a view of how much the call on that will be on the City Council. And so, as part of the earmarked reserves, we set up an insurance fund to cover those costs. But we do review them, so it's not a figure that is there forever. As you know, because of the investment in our highways through unsupported borrowing, we have managed to improve the quality of our highways, and as a consequence, there have been fewer trips and fewer claims, and so being able to reduce that element of the earmarked reserves and to put that back into budgets in the past. And that process continually goes on. So it may be that there is a lack of understanding by some members of the earmarked reserves, but to get up and to suggest that a very prudential, sensible approach is wrong. What you should do is actually go and find out and get the actual information and get the understanding of why it's there. Because, quite frankly, the danger is if you don't follow those prudential policies and you just follow a slogan and say, oh, it's council sitting on money, let's go and spend them on something else. I'm afraid, you're on a very quick route to being before the courts for imprudential behaviour. So, yeah, just look at it. Just look at it.
Councillor Jolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also two or three of the things that have been raised. First of all, Embankment 101. The whole point about Embankment 101, as I understand it, and the scrutiny board will be looking at the business case for 101 as part of its consideration of the budget and the capital programme, is that it's investor save. We're investing in this and it will give a return, and that return should, in theory, and that's what we're checking, cover the costs of borrowing. So it will be not a drain on the council's resource. It could even be a profit, but it's partly to do with regeneration. It's regenerating a part of the city, it's bringing in business, it's bringing in business rates, etc. And that's the whole point, and that's what we have to check. Councillor Karen Greedo says, why can't we spend that money on housing? If we did, it wouldn't be investor save. If we did spend it on housing, I don't know, I think there are limits on what we could spend on council housing. If it did, it would be unsupported borrowing, which we won't get any money back for. And you've said that you're worried about unsupported borrowing. If we use that money, which we will get a return on, to invest in housing, it will be unsupported borrowing, which is what you're concerned about. Now, the other thing is, Councillor Derek Antrobus has talked about the reserves position. I won't say much more about that, except again, the scrutiny board will be looking into that to check that they're at the right level. All councils hold these for the reasons that Councillor Antrobus has said, and we will be. It's not just a pot of money. This is the Eric Pickles version of local government economics. You've got masses of money that you're not using, and you can spend it to keep your council tax down, avoid cuts. It's not like that. So that's what we have to check. And as much as saying, is that money there, could we use it? The other question is it enough? Have we actually been risky drawing down some of that money? Is there a proper risk analysis to say whether that's justified? Another point that was raised about the collection fund, and this again is what you might call an easy shot. Yes, our collection rate isn't as good as it would hope it would be. But and again, the scrutiny board has been through this several times, that there's not so much the in-year collection rate that's vital, but the state of the collection fund. And money comes in the first year, not as much as one would have hoped for, but it then comes on in further years, and so the collection fund keeps in balance. That is the critical thing. So saying it's all your own fault because you don't collect enough, it's all your own fault because you're borrowing to invest in something like Embankment 101. It's all your own fault because you've got masses of reserves. That, as I say, is the Eric Pickles version of local government economics, which is used to try and deflect the real reason why this is happening, which is government austerity. It's a way of trying to get out of accepting that position. A couple of other points. I think that Councillor Les Turner, I'm not quite because my hearing's not brilliant, said something about the government using the increase in council tax to achieve its aims, which seems to be an admission, as I heard it, that the council tax increase is actually down to the government at the end of the day. And because it is. We are allowed to put it up 2.99%, which virtually every authority in the country is doing, because it's the only way to plug gaps. We are allowed to raise 1% extra to try and plug the gaps in social care. Then the government says they are putting more money in. No, they're allowing us to put up the council tax. And as for the precept, the bulk of that extra is police, where Andy Burnham is increasing the police precept by the maximum amount allowable in order to plug the gaps in the police service. Again, that comes back to the government reducing the funding there. And the rest of it, the whole of his increase of his own precept, is to do with buses, it's to do with transport, it's to do with the fact that we haven't yet got a bus reform act which allows us to franchise in Greater Manchester, and it's all going towards giving concessionary fares to 16 and 17-year-olds. So it's for a very specific thing, whether you agree with that or not. Councillor Robin Garrido, you can always tell when the Tories have run out of ideas when they drag up Liam Byrne again. It's the oldest Tory trope in the book, straight out of the Central Office briefing notes. But Robin Garrido says that the problem that we're in is for when we had a Labour Council, Labour government, we vastly overspent. Well, those who were around at the time don't really remember much of that, Robin. But the point is, and my final point, if it was so extreme, if it was so bad, You say you're not putting an alternative budget because you're still looking at it. You've had years if you thought that was the problem to come up with a better system, and you don't, because when you did, it was a pretty limp affair. You don't, because the only way that you could address that is accepting the only way to do what you want to do is even more cuts, and that comes straight from government policy, and you're never going to admit that.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. As in previous years, I hadn't intended to speak. However, I find myself once again being unable to sit quietly, having heard some of the comments made in the chamber today. The initial comment that got a rise from me was from Councillor Turner, saying that Paul's statement was very predictable. Well, of course it is. We've been warning you about the impact of austerity for years, the increasing pressures it places on services, on the workforce, on residents, but obviously it continues to fall on deaf ears. Analysis of official figures by Action for Children, Barnardo's, the NSPCC, the Children's Society and the National Children's Bureau has identified kids' cuts hotspots across England, where local councils have faced the biggest real-term drop in funding. Now, this analysis shows that the estimated funding available per child, aged 0 to 19 in Salford, has reduced since 2010 by 40%. So that's not Conservative head office, that's some National Charities analysis there. I've spoken on numerous occasions about the pressure in particular on children's services, despite the additional investment that was made last year by the City Mayor of £4.5 million. Nationally, we've currently got a £1.4 billion funding gap this year. By 2025, local authorities will face a £3 billion funding gap. Funding for children and young people's services for the most deprived local authority has fallen almost twice as fast than that for the local authorities that are the least deprived. They are the facts. Councillor Turner did say he thinks some of this should be funded nationally. So I've got to ask, what the hell have you done about it? We've heard false statements about council tax, seemingly... Have you got something to say, or can I continue, because I'm on my feet? Is that being allowed?
I'm not in powers. I would like to be just a mere local councillor, which there are many. So I shan't sway the government on this.
Is that a point of information?
Yeah, I'm sure. I just like to enforce the collaboration.
Can I carry on now? Yeah, thanks. So yeah, what exactly have you done about it? We've heard false statements about council tax with you seemingly being unaware it was actually frozen for, 6 or 7 years in this city until we were forced by the government to raise it to mitigate the effect of Conservative austerity attacks. The self-confessed lack of understanding of local authority, of Salford's budget and the cuts we've had to make by the leader of Salford Conservatives is quite frankly terrifying. The achievements listed by Councillor Garrido absolutely should be congratulated. But the difference is that those achievements have been made despite a Conservative government raiding council budgets, disproportionately affecting those most in need and those in the highest deprivation, slashing welfare support and having absolutely no idea of the real-life impact of ideological austerity. I called on the opposition last year to lobby your government on behalf of our city, and I ask again, what exactly have you done? You sit there and you say you can't support this budget, but you haven't even spent any time to try and put forward any alternatives. So rather than smirking at each other, making flippant comments, trying to belittle factual posters and the real stark reality of the fact that your government has taken 53% of Salford's money off Salford's people, and yes, I have recycled that line from last year, then shame on you. Shame on your party and shame on your government, because it's an absolute disgrace. Just wanted to finish by saying I was also exceptionally disappointed to hear the comments that were made by Councillor Wilson. Having served in the City Mayor's Cabinet, I can absolutely attest to the passion and commitment of the Mayor and of his team. I can also attest to the agony that's caused by having to make the incredibly difficult decisions that have had to be made because of austerity and the cuts that have been made on our budgets year on year. The achievements that have been made in Salford are due to our Labour City Mayor, to a Labour cabinet and to Labour members in this chamber using our Labour values to make the very best decisions possible that we can in spite of the impact of evil Tory policies, chronic underfunding and a lack of understanding of vital services, need and impact. And I'm proud to be a Labour councillor and I'm proud to have supported Paul Dennett, who in my opinion is doing an incredibly difficult job in increasingly impossible position. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Just some brief points, first of all. A week on Sunday, I'm looking forward to going to the briefing by the British Board of Deputies for councillors, and I hope that many other councillors in this chamber will be joining me there. I was also pleased to go to the Holocaust Memorial Day event a few weeks ago, and with a very large number, the largest number of councillors at that event that I've seen for many years. I'm proud to have stood in this position and on behalf of this council moved the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism. I look forward and appreciate the meetings I have with other councillors, with the Jewish Leadership Council in Manchester, and we're having another. And I'd also like to thank Councillor Saunders for the contribution he makes at the Equalities panel, but also for the information that you gave us from the CST about attacks. It was a national report, but there were sections in there about attacks on the Jewish community in Manchester and Salford, and we are now pursuing that. So I would reject wholeheartedly any accusations of anti-Semitism by this Labour group. Can I also say, looking at the minutes of last year's meeting, moving on, and I will read a section to it, just so that to remind people of what we did last year and what people did. The chair of the council then put the motion to council, and in accordance with the Local Authorities Standing Orders England Amendment Regulation 214, a named vote was taken, following which declared it carried unanimously 52 votes to 0. And I won't read out all of the 52 names, but the people...
What information?
I think I'm giving information, and I think there's a lot of information. I have not finished making my point, and so how you...
I told you to say that, Mr. Mayor. Okay. The information about it is that, first of all, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, I do withdraw the comments that I made. Thank you. I think probably a combination of maybe age and the fact that this year's gone very quickly. Certainly all previous years we had. Last year, quite correct, I mistakenly thought that we had actually must have happened last year. We quite know we didn't. I withdraw my comments.
Right, so I'm pleased that Councillor Robin Garrido perhaps has read the minutes as I have done as well, but just for the benefit of everybody else in the council, I would let you know, well, I won't read out all the 52 names, but Councillor Les Turner, Councillor Karen Garrido, Councillor Gillian Collinson, Councillor Robin Garrido, Councillor Bob Clark, Councillor Saunders and Councillor Clarkson all voted for it, along with Councillor Lindley, who's not here today. So the question I then ask is, what is the difference between last year and this year that they're now changing their tune? And you can leave that to your imaginations. What I would say, though, the final point I want to say is that we have spent every Monday, it seems, for the last year with mayoral team meetings discussing the budget and coming up with this. A lot of work has gone into this over the year. Councillor Hines has pointed out one of the differences from previous years that the opposition have stopped putting forward alternative budgets or moving amendments. The other thing that's changed over the years that you'll notice that we haven't had demonstrations outside from the trade unions. And one of the reasons for that is that we've been having very constructive discussions with the trade unions on these proposals. And I think it's fair to say that I'm sorry, are you making a point of order? Are you speaking across the chamber or what?
There's on the point of information, the unions were demonstrating outside the school.
Not against us. The point I am making, Mr. Chair, and I thought that you were to moderate the meeting, not to try to correct me. The point I was making was that we have had long discussions with the trade unions, and this budget comes generally with their support. So I just want to make those points, and so I finish up by saying I commend the budget and commend the speech that the City Mayor made. Thank you.
Councillor King, last speaker. Go on.
Just to say that the protesters outside of the Health Improvement Service, a very valuable service to this community. That's it. The protesters outside with the unions were the Health Improvement Service, or some of the Health Improvement Service staff, who are obviously concerned about the 75,000 cut to that service. Very valuable service, and I did go out and actually speak to them and try and reassure them that, you know, that post that I'm not proposing to delete, that's being frozen, that we will try and fill that post as soon as we're able to. So that was just a point of information about who those individuals were.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair of the Council. I will be very brief because we've had a fairly long morning. Could I also welcome back our colleague, Councillor Lisa Stone. Lisa was at our Labour group, incidentally, so it's good to have you back. You spoke very well earlier on here today as well. Now then, I just want to make a very brief... It's on, yeah? Right, can you not hear me? Sorry about that. I just want to make very brief comments and to challenge this notion once again about the incompetence, supposedly, of the Labour government and the Labour Party, mentioned by Councillor Turner and, to some degree, by Councillor Robin Garrido about no money left. If you go back long enough, I think you'll find that Reginald Maudling, I think it was, a Tory, senior Tory, might have mentioned this way back in the 1960s or thereabouts. Now, on economic competence, therefore, the Mayor did rightly mention the impact of austerity on the nation and indeed on our city over the past 9 years. The result is, and what kind of economic incompetence does it take to reduce our economy, to shrink our economy by £100 billion? The impact of that on every household in this city and every household across the nation is to shrink their income by £3,629 per year. That means that it extracts expenditure from those individuals, and that is why, to some degree, our high streets are beginning to shut down, because there's an extraction of wealth from our communities and from our individuals because of the impact of austerity. So my question, therefore, to you is, are you going to lobby your government and try to restore that £100 billion into the economy of the nation and into the pockets of the residents of our city and the rest of the nation? Thank you, Chair. They're bamboozled. Sorry.
City Mayor.
City Mayor to respond.
Okay, there's an awful lot of comments been made on this year's budget for 2019-20, so I will try and address all the points that have been made by members of the council. First of all, starting with Councillor Turner and the points you made with regards to my speech, and specifically the points you made on council tax. I just want to draw members' attention to spending calculations undertaken by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government under the Conservative Party. Since 2015-16, councils in England have seen core spending calculations reduced by £6 billion, £690 million. When the government creates its core spending calculations, it makes assumptions around council tax increases for councils in England. And I note from Councillor Saunders' comments, he wasn't clear on the spending calculations he reiterated from central office. And dare I say it, it's because government, Conservative government, and the coalition prior to that, if we look at spending calculations since 2015-16, they actually assumed council tax increases would bring in £5 billion, £891 million. So let us not be fooled by the obfuscation that the Tory party often engage in. Because what sits behind many of these spending calculations is a government that is intent on spending people's money. It's not their own money. They're forcing councils up and down the country to actually hike council tax by the referendum limit. And that is part of their spending calculations. This council will not fall for the absolute nonsense and disingenuousness with which you talk about spending. The issue of, if you like, the capital programme, Councillor Turner, that you drew attention to. Now, what's the alternative? And I'm very aware that today the Conservative Party haven't come forward with a robust alternative budget. All they've done is highlighted concerns with our budget and provided absolutely no alternative. Dare I say it, the alternative, according to the Conservative Party, is managing decline, continuing to implement austerity and local government cuts. The posters you have at the front here are a reminder of the facts. This isn't politicking, this isn't Labour Party. These are the facts of this local council and what we've been dealing with since 2010. Councillor Stone highlighted that the revenue support grant has been cut by 53% since 2010. If this is a private organisation, it would have gone bankrupt. All the staff would have been made redundant. And then when you look at the unfunded budget pressures, what that leads us to is £211 million taken out of Salford City Council's budget because of a Tory government and a coalition government prior to it. So, what is the alternative? Well, the alternative, dare I say, to every member of this council chamber is to think about what I would refer to as municipal socialism, where local authorities take an active role to try and extract value from decisions it takes on capital. Why? Because that's how we protect jobs and services in this local authority. And all of you in this chamber will know that budgets, certainly under my leadership, we have benefited from the growth of this city. We have protected jobs and services because of the growth in this city. We've come forward with one-offs. Many of those one-offs will not be possible had we not engaged in a capital programme to try and grow this city. And when we're talking about capital, let's not forget the structural divide we have within this country, where public capital is stuffed into the City of London and the South East at the expense of the north of this country. It's an absolute disgrace that we have a Conservative Party in this chamber saying, what are you doing on capital? I ask you, what is your government doing on capital for the people of Salford and for the people of Greater Manchester? Absolute disgrace. Now moving on to Councillor Garrido, and it's interesting what he had to say about, you know, the speech I gave at the university recently. The university, by the way, for members of the council, were launching a social and economic impact assessment. As you know, they've been looking at social value over the last few years and trying to measure their impact as an institution. That was the meeting I attended, looking at the social impact of our university in the city of Salford. It was not a meeting on local government finance. It was not a meeting on austerity and local government cuts since 2010. It was a meeting to look at the impact of the institution. So why would I be there talking about local government financing? I really just don't understand, Councillor Garrido, why you've conflated the two. And back to the point on no money left in the coffers. You know, it was Reginald Maudley, who was actually the Tory Chancellor at the time in 1964, who actually said, "Sorry to leave it in this state, old boy." So I think what you'll find is the Tory party set a precedent on making comments about money not being in the coffers. So in terms of the council tax rise, I think I've already illustrated that within your own spending calculations, you've assumed that councils up and down the country will be increasing council tax by 2.99%. And I think you'll probably find, if you look at local authorities up and down the country, many of them are actually doing just that, including the Conservative-run local authorities. Why? Because they fundamentally have absolutely no choice. Increase the council tax or cut more jobs and services from the local authority. That is the choice we're faced with, and that is the choice we're faced with today, which is why we have decided to increase council tax by 2.99% and the preset for adult social care by 1%. Councillor Reynolds highlighted, 2 years we've been waiting for a national solution to the crisis in care. And we're still waiting now to this date. We have absolutely no certainty how the crisis in care and how this is funded in a context of an ageing population is going to be addressed. Absolute incompetence on the part of the Conservative government. Okay, so let's move on to other areas. So Councillor Paul Wilson, I am really upset at the comments that you've made. I have never, and nor has this executive ever, proposed to build houses in Buell Hill Park. Let me be clear to this council. What I've been clear of is that interested parties, after expressions of interest, will work with the community, will work with local councillors to come up with a solution for Buell Hill Mansion. And that solution is not prescribed by myself as the mayor of this city. It's not prescribed by my mayoral team or the executive of this council. That solution is arrived at through collaboration and discourse and debate amongst the communities that fantastic asset that is Buell Hill Park and Buell Hill Mansion will serve. And as you asked me in the last council meeting, I categorically told you that there will be no homes built in the park. And I did that because after several amounts of consultation, and I understand yourself and other ward councillors have even met with people like Capital and Centric to actually discuss this, it's quite clear to me that the community and the residents and the public do not want houses built in the park. I and my executive will be bound by what the community want. But make no mistake, what we need to do now is find a solution for Buell Hill Mansion. So we are exploring enabling development in other parts of the city, because I absolutely want to bring that fantastic asset back into use for the public in this city. And, I do echo Councillor Hines's comments. It's unfortunate in some respects that these issues and concerns weren't raised in the Labour group on Monday. And being a Labour Party member, I guess I despair when I look at the state of British politics at the moment, where the self and the individual seems to have become far more important than collective responsibility. Collective responsibility is something that the Labour Party understand. Yes, we take difficult decisions. You're absolutely right. We debate, we disagree. That is the nature of life. And we'll never agree on anything. But that doesn't stop us being united against a government that fundamentally believes in austerity and cuts that disproportionately impacts the poorest and the most vulnerable in society. And that is what motivates me day in, day out. That is why I'm here today delivering this budget, is to try my damnedest to protect the people of this city. I take absolutely no joy in any of these proposals here today. Absolutely not. £211 million has been taken out of this council's budget. What an absolute disgrace. The 22nd most deprived local authority in the country. We talk about failure to collect council tax as well. And I know Councillor Wilson made some play of this. What's interesting is in this year's budget, you'll notice that £1 million is going towards the budget target because we've actually improved council tax collection and business rate collection in the city of Salford. But also, let's think about this for a moment. 22nd most deprived local authority, not doing terribly well on council tax and business rates. Dare I say it to members of this council, there's a relationship between the two. Why? Because people are unable to make ends meet in this city because of what's happening within the labour market, because of welfare reform, because of what's happening in the housing market where people are being priced out of truly affordable rents and home ownership. And it's in that context that we need to consider business rates collection, council tax collection. People in this city are choosing between heating their homes, putting food on the table, and paying their bills. And dare I say it, that is one of the reasons why we struggle to actually collect council tax in this city. We will continue to do our best to protect the most vulnerable people in this city. And our anti-poverty strategy, which Councillor Boschall has championed, is doing exactly that. Councillor Merry, thanks for your comments. In many respects, your comments were about responding to other comments that people had made, but you did highlight how we've been engaging with the trade unions and the staff around proposals in this year's budget around early years, and we'll continue to do that. I mean, the proposal looks at implementing that in the next financial year off the back of consultation with trade unions and members of staff. So thanks for updating on that. I think you're absolutely right to highlight that the Conservatives or the Tories are engaged in a raid of funding for local government. Local government, because year on year we set balanced budgets, we do financial management really well. Local government is seen as a soft touch by this government, basically. And why we get austerity and cuts lumped on us year on year on year. But it doesn't get any easier. It really doesn't get any easier. Councillor Hines, thanks for your comments, and I note that a lot of that was in response to comments made by Councillor Wilson. And you did talk about Councillor Garrido saying he voted against the budget, but Councillor Garrido has kindly corrected that that wasn't the case, and everyone was in favour of the budget last financial year. And as Councillor Ferguson highlighted as well, last financial year I think we had significant earmarked reserves as well. So it was interesting that last financial year you didn't have an issue with this, but this financial year you do. Dare I say it, that's because you're not actually thoroughly engaging with the budget process of this city council. Because you talk about inherent contradictions. I think there's actually inherent contradictions on your side of the council chamber. Councillor Reynolds, thank you for your passionate speech about what's happening in health and social care. You know, you drew attention to the adult social care grant of 2.2 million for 1920, which absolutely is a pittance, especially when you consider it in the context of 211 million being taken out of our budget since 2010. You also drew attention to the public health loss of 3.5 million, non-ring-fence funding transferred to local authorities, and then absolutely hammered by austerity and local government cuts. Wider determinants of health. I think this is an area that I've got real interest in, because all too often do we just think about treating the symptoms, and actually moving money to actually improve people's health and well-being is going to be the big challenge over forthcoming years. We have waited for the Green Paper, we're still waiting for the Green Paper, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as we go through this spending review and fair funding review in local government, to see if again government come forward with more hikes in social care precepts or other gimmicks and mechanisms to basically not engage in what I would refer to as progressive taxation. Taxation that taxes the highest earners within society and the corporations, and we put that money into the public sector. That's what the Labour Party believe in. The Tories fundamentally do not, and let's not forget that. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for your kind comments as well. And you're absolutely right, this is a budget of damage limitation, and dare I say it, it's been a budget of damage limitation since 2010. This is not new, you know. Cuts play out disproportionately, we know, in the north of the country, and certainly areas like Salford where we have high levels of deprivation. And you were absolutely right to highlight that some of the first local authorities to almost go bankrupt are indeed Tory councils. And what does that tell you about Conservative financial management? Well, it tells you they're not terribly good at that. Also, thanks for your comments about anti-Semitism, and I understand, you know, the last 2 years of your life have been very, very difficult, but it was heartening to hear that you felt support from colleagues within the Labour Party and this council. Councillor Garrido, you wanted to bring us back on track, and Councillor Karen Garrido, and talk about the budget, and you talked about reserves, and this is an interesting point really, because if you look at some of our reserves, our earmarked reserves, because there's a difference, as you know, as colleagues know, between general reserves and earmarked reserves. Well, as has already been highlighted in this chamber, some of those reserves are around provisions for insurance claims. Some of it is in connection with the borrowing associated with the stadium, as many of you will be aware. Some of it's also in connection with some of the underwriting of leases in terms of some of our economic development, because obviously that will change over time. So making provision for all of these things within our budget is absolutely the prudential thing to do. And it's encouraged, as we've heard in this chamber, by SIPFA and by the government nationally. I mean, are we suggesting that, similar to the Socialist Party suggest actually, that we just fritter away these earmarked reserves? Well, can I just say, if we do that, that is absolute madness, because if anything changes in the environment in which we find ourselves, which we know at this point in time in a context of Brexit is especially precarious, you know, this council could go bankrupt if we don't make provisions in terms of earmarked reserves. So yes, let's look at it, let's enlighten each other on what those earmarked reserves are there for. I mean, overview and scrutiny of, as far as I understand, scrutinise this budget. So if we want to look at earmarked reserves, which, you know, don't significantly change from one year to the next actually, but we'll look at this and look at this in detail so you understand exactly what's going on there. Okay, moving on to Councillor Saunders. You asked about the 5 outstanding local authority nurseries. You'll be aware in the 1920 budget we've made provision within this year's budget to continue them staying open for this next financial year. Do I know what's going to happen beyond 1920? I can't give this chamber any cast iron guarantees at this stage. Why? Because we're entering the fair funding review with government, as you all know. We're also entering a new spending review period for 4 years. Do we know what's going to come out of that? No, but obviously we have an indication through some of the consultations that have been undertaken recently that it isn't looking great for places like Salford, where we have higher levels of deprivation and need. And I remember at the last council meeting, I did ask the Tory party if you had responded to the consultation on the settlement for local government. I've still not really had an answer on that. And I know on Thursday of last week, consultations also closed on the fair funding review. So I'd be interested to know, again, whether or not the Conservatives in Salford have responded to those consultations. Why is that important? Because aren't we in the game of trying to influence government? You know, Councillor Stone highlighted, what have you done to lobby your own party that are in government? Well, I'm asking, what have we done to actually engage with these consultations that have taken place on the future of local government financing? So I'd be interested to know on that, but I'll follow up outside of this chamber as to whether or not you've done that. Also, you talk about getting in contact with Conservative Central Office, didn't you, Councillor Saunders? And it was interesting when I heard you talking about those numbers. You failed to mention whether those numbers included assumptions around council tax hikes and adult social care precept hikes. So if we can have a conversation after this council meeting about what sits behind those numbers, that would be really useful, because the spending calculations I've seen from the Ministry of Housing certainly suggest that they're hiking council tax to talk about these figures. So happy to look at that. You did refer to the posters as being political. The posters aren't political. You should recognise the posters, because this information formed part of our budget consultation with the residents of Salford this year. This is factual information. This is not party political information. It has, you know, the council's logo on it, and also it has the office of the City Mayor on it. These are factual numbers. This is what's happening with Salford City Council's budget. That is not a political statement that we're making here today. We're just trying to highlight to everyone in this chamber exactly what is going on with the budget. Now, you also talked about Labour voting against the local government finance settlement. Well, I think you'll find that the Labour Party had good reason to vote against the local government finance settlement. And I remind you of what I actually said at the last council meeting on local government financing, specifically on the negative revenue support grant, which is stuffing 17.259 million into Surrey Council, 10.949 into Buckinghamshire, 10.789 million into Dorset Council, 7.470 into Richmond upon Thames, and 7.170 into Cambridge. You'll recognise those local authorities, because back in 2016-17, Greg Clark at the time managed to find 300 million to put into some of those again. Surrey, back in 2016-17, got £24.10 million. Buckinghamshire, £9.22 million. Dorset, 5.92. Richmond upon Thames, 5.83. Cambridgeshire, £6.38 million. The reason why the Labour Party voted against the settlement is because exactly what your party is doing with local government financing at the moment. You're forcing councils up and down the country to hike council tax, whilst at the same time stuffing money into Tory-run councils, predominantly in the south of the country. As far as I'm concerned, that is absolutely a reason for the Labour Party to vote down this year's local government finance settlement. Because morally and ethically, the approach your party is taking to local government finance is fundamentally bankrupt. Councillor Antrobus, thank you for the points you made around the planning panel and obviously the decision that was made on a planning application. You also talked a little bit about earmark reserves and why we have those, and highlighted that some of the provision there is around tripping claims and insurance claims more generally. So thanks for substantiating that. However, we do need to reassure our Tory colleagues that obviously, you know, they're there for a thorough reason. Councillor Jolly, you referenced Embankment 101, and that this is an investor-save proposal that you and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee will be looking at. You're absolutely right to highlight we do this to improve job opportunities in the city of Salford, to bring in more business rates into the city council, to even bring in rent to help us to protect jobs and services and obviously finance the associated borrowing. I don't see any real alternative to us engaging with capital in this way. The alternative is managing decline. It's managing the decline of our budget under Conservative government. Yes, I mean, I've already highlighted that the collection rate is actually improving. You know, we've put £1 million into this year's budget. to offset, obviously, the impact of cuts and austerity. And we want to continue to do that work to make sure we try our best to improve our collection rate on council tax and business rates, but also at the same time protect the most vulnerable in society. Councillor Stone, thank you very much for the comments you made, and you were highlighting specifically children's services cuts up and down the country, especially for the 0 to 19 since 2010. And as you rightly highlighted, we've seen reductions of over 40%. That is disgraceful. Over 40% reductions for the children of this city. And you also talked about an existing funding gap of 1.4 billion, which is scheduled to rise to 3 billion by 2025. Shocking. This demonstrates that we have a government that is continuing its commitment to austerity, disproportionately impacting local government, creating huge budget pressures for services for children. Absolutely scandalous. And, you know, when Councillor Turner stands up and says we have no sway over their party's government, you know, I really am dumbfounded. Words actually fail me. You know, we do have sway over what the government do. You know, where is the Tory party taking to the press and the media to say how disgusted they are at what their government are doing? They're not doing that. If they did that, dare I say it, it would have an impact on what the government are doing to the City Council here in Salford. Where is the Conservative Party getting down to London to campaign outside of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government? They're not doing that. You know, so absolute nonsense. I do believe, as elected members, you have sway over the government. You can influence the government, and I implore you, really, to influence the government ASAP on behalf of the people of this city. And I agree, it is a shame on them, on their party, which is an absolute disgrace when it comes to local government. Councillor Ferguson, thank you for your comments around all the work that's happening with the Jewish community, including the briefing you're attending at the Board of Deputies in the near future. I'm also joining you at that briefing. I've confirmed my attendance. Holocaust Memorial event, again, you know, it's something that's very dear to my heart, and I always try to attend every single year because I think it's a really important event in our equalities calendar within this city to support our Jewish community and Jewish colleagues. Also, you talked about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which this council has already passed, and you thank Councillor Saunders for his involvement in the Equalities Committee in the city. And also, I am aware that we've either set it up or in the process of setting up a meeting with the CST, so thank you for that. Also, thanks for drawing our attention to the minutes of the last meeting, because sometimes we kind of forget what's happened, don't we, in the past, and maybe that's quite selective on occasions, dare I say it. But yeah, 52-0 voted in favour of last year's budget, and thanks for reminding of that. Councillor King, thank you for referencing Reginald Maudling in terms of the Tory Chancellor, who obviously previously said there's no money in the pot, there's no money in the coffers. You are absolutely right. You know, we've got a government here that fundamentally believes in taxing people locally and extracting wealth, really. We don't really have a government, in my opinion, that fundamentally gets economic and industrial strategy. You know, we've got a government consulting at the moment on an industrial strategy. And we know, you know, where the state, where the public sector spends capital, that has a profound impact in terms of creating economies, creating jobs and opportunities. Unfortunately, we have a government that fundamentally believes or ideologically believes in austerity, the shrinking of the state, allowing everything to be done by the market. Well, dare I say it, we've got copious examples in this country where the market, when it's left to its own devices, fundamentally fails the British public. The issue really is, what is the relationship between the state and the market, and how can the state intervene to make sure wealth and value is retained rather than leaking out of parts of the country. You asked finally, and I think this is a good point to end on really, is, you know, we are lobbying government. Are you lobbying government? And I think that's a challenge for the Conservatives in this council chamber today. This is a difficult budget, and for me, it doesn't get any easier. As it stands currently after this financial year, as it stands, we've got another £15+ million to take out of the budget. The mayoral team will be working on that all year round and will be taking exactly the same approach to this budget as we have previous ones. But what I say to every member in this chamber is enough really is enough. You know, we have to campaign against this government and the havoc and hell really that it's wreaking on the people of this city. You know, it is not acceptable for us to continue to do what we're doing. We really need to raise up and let government know what is going on in local government, in Salford, in Greater Manchester, in the north of the country, and in other parts of this country. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Council is asked to approve the recommendations as outlined in the report submitted, and this has to be done by a name vote. Therefore, can I ask members to state clearly that they approve, do not approve, or abstain when your name is called out by the monitoring officer? Thank you. Monitoring officer, please.
City Mayor Dennett. City Mayor Dennett. Councillor Bentham. Councillor Boshall. Councillor Brocklehurst. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Antrobus. Apologise. Councillor Birch. Councillor Clark. Councillor Clarkson. Councillor Cohen. Councillor Collinson. Councillor Connor. Councillor Critchley. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dickman. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Karen Garrido. Councillor Robin Garrido. Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Hesling. Councillor Hines. Councillor Jolly. Councillor Kelly. Councillor King. Councillor Lancaster. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Linden. Councillor McCusker. Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Merry. Councillor Morris. Councillor Curran-Ziza. Councillor Ord. Councillor Pevitt. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Gina Reynolds. Councillor Neil Reynolds. Councillor Ryan. Councillor Saunders. Councillor Sharp. Councillor Stone. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Turner. Councillor Joan Walsh. Councillor John Walsh. Councillor Warmisham. Councillor Warner. Councillor Weir. Councillor Wheeler. Councillor Paul Wilson. The motion is carried.
The motion is carried.
Treasury Management Report.
Item 4, the Treasury Management Strategy Annual Investment Strategy and Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Statement. Councillor Hines.
Chair. First of all, can I apologise for this body today for my behaviour earlier on? Not for the content, but perhaps the way I behaved. I'd like to apologise for that. It was out of order. Right, Treasury Management. Well, you know, this is obviously, some people will see this a very, very dry issue that we talk about, to say the least. And as you can see through the report, it's very, very comprehensive. Really, really goes to the zen detail of what it's all about. Now, obviously, I will do my best to answer questions, but if I can't answer any, because there's so much technique in it and technology in it, the fact that I would have to get back to members with all that later on, if that's the case. First of all, though, if you look at, let me just get it because it's just gone off me. Yeah, if you look at in the introduction, you can see, of course, in 1.11, it's incumbent upon the council to, in fact, make sure that it has enough cash in its coffers to be able to meet its day-to-day expenses. And that's what we endeavour and obviously do, because we've never been called upon to show that we haven't done that. On 1.112, you see that also, and I think this is probably the crux of what the Treasury Management policy is, and that's about borrowing and how we pay for that borrowing going forward. And therefore, we do have advisors to assist us on that, but this is what that one's all about. And of course, looking at the borrowing, we make sure that we look for security, liquidity, and of course yield when we lend money. Never mind borrow it, lend money. Those are the criteria we do there. Now, I just want to make the point again, because we have had an issue this morning about our borrowing, which we usually do. But I just want to point just one thing out. Over the years, and it shows quite clearly now, for every £1 that we spend, get £2.20 back. That's important, considering the monies that we're struggling to find to provide services. And that's realised 21.5 million over the last number of years. So that's crucial of where we go forward with that. Now, one of the issues that's really important to get over today is that because of some authorities in this country, basically because they're finding that they're strapped for cash, have gone into what would be termed speculation of using their monies to speculate, which we certainly have not done. Some people may say the issue that was raised earlier on was speculation, but really there is a good reason that we've done that, and that we can point that out, and we can be scrutinised on it, and we'll continue to be in that position. But as I say, it has made a great impression on the people of this city. Remember, at one time, there was a population decrease. People were leaving the city. Now that has totally turned round, where people are coming back into the city, which in itself gives us problems. But nevertheless, it's better to do that than one going the other way. And much of that has been done because of the investments this council, the courage of this council, what it's done over the years to make sure that that takes place. But on this issue of speculation, I've asked the question over and over again. Other people have asked the question over and again. Are we speculating? No, we're not. We're not speculating, and we won't speculate like other authorities have done. We do, and we're cognizant of the fact that in a diminishing budget, a bottom line, we're always looking very, very carefully the fact that our capital programme doesn't get out of sync with what we can do. We understand the redeeming of the debt, which is the capital financing, is an issue that's always on my mind and the Mayor's mind and the Cabinet's mind. And we will be looking at that very, very carefully as we go along. So every penny that we spend in capital expenditure is for, I believe, and the mayoral team believes, is for the right reasons, which would serve us well, bring people into the city, bring further investments into the city, and that's what we will continue to do. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it and see if anybody does ask any questions, and if they do, I'll try and answer them. If I can't, I'll get back to you later.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor.
Councillor Antrobus had his hand up first.
Who did?
Councillor Antrobus had his hand up first.
Since I wanted to make a comment, and since I'm on my feet, I'm happy to second Councillor Hines' motion that we approve this Treasury Management Strategy. And I was very taken by the comments that he's just made about the importance of our investment in terms of regeneration. I've heard some comments today about, oh, you shouldn't be spending money on this, we shouldn't be spending money on that. If we'd taken the same attitude when we underpinned some of the investment in Salford Quays at the very start of that, we wouldn't have had the great transformation in our city and all the benefits for employment, for new homes and new businesses that has brought. So, you know, let's be consistent on this. Salford City Council has a proud history of using the City Council's finances to make sure that we deliver regeneration in the city, and the strategies that we're adopting today should deliver that. Look, I wanted to raise one very particular point, and that is to thank and congratulate Councillor Hines on introducing or amending the policy, which is on paragraph 110 of Appendix D. This is socially responsible investments, and in particular the amendment which says that we will, as a City Council, avoid direct investment in institutions with material links to environmentally harmful activities, including fossil fuels. I think that's an important step forward for the City Council and chimes in with the agenda that we have been adopting both in Salford and at Greater Manchester. For example, the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework's commitment for Greater Manchester to become carbon neutral, the opposition to fracking within the GMSF. I think that these are all positive steps forward. And at yesterday's Carbon Reduction Board, and some members who were there heard that we're likely to get a report in the next few weeks which demonstrates we've hit our target of reducing the City Council's own carbon emissions by 40%. Of course, then we can move on to the next challenge. But I'd like to thank Councillor Hines for yet another step forward in the right direction of helping us to address climate change for today's and future generations.
Thank you. Councillor Candido.
Thank you. Councillor Hines, you and I have been on this matter for a long time, and I still have great difficulty in understanding, even when officers explain like they did at our budget meeting. And I find that our officers seem to handle our money very well and put it in the right place, and I think with your assistance. So I've always found it quite difficult to actually challenge this. My other thing that I'm very concerned about is the LOBO loans. I know we might have had a bit of a problem with those, and I just wondered whether we've actually sorted that out with the LOBO loans, and what are we going to do different about that? Now, the other thing, right, I wish it was just about our investments and things like that, but it actually covers, as you rightly say, our borrowing. And you see, the problem I have, right, is that that money that's been put on one side for borrowing, right, is quite for places like the Embankment and New Bailey, right, is a lot of money. And I find it quite difficult to actually think about who's going to be paying this back. If the loans, if we come out of Brexit, I don't know whether we're in or we're out, right, at the moment, or whether we're going to go with no leave. Where is that going to leave us, right, with regards to these loans that we've got in the European banks, and how is that going to affect us? And I am concerned about the amount of borrowing, as you know, with regards to unsupported and investor save. So I want to agree with the Treasury's management, the way that yourself and the staff are dealing with it. But my concern is that the overall borrowing and how we're actually going to pay that back with the LOBO loans and etc. So I wondered if you could just do something, say something about that, please.
As I've tried to say, believe that I have said, that we do look and try and dot every I and cross every T on every part of investment that we make. As I've said, and I've got to say, and I know what your position is, you've always felt as though that you've always felt that borrowing and the unsupported borrowing that we have to do is the wrong line. I disagree with that. I believe that it has served us well. I've just given you some figures to show that it's served us well. But I am cognizant of the fact that things are changing. I don't know what's going to happen either today. I think there's a vote in Parliament today. And I don't know what's going to happen on Brexit. None of us know what's going to happen on Brexit at the minute. None of us know. But I'm advised from our advisors, from my financial officer and her team, that at the moment, all the monies that they are obviously watching it very, very carefully, quite understandably, as I've tried to say, both from a risk position and from a position of, in fact, on the revenue budget where we have to redeem that debt. But at the moment, I'm content to feel that things are okay. Things might change. Also, I just want to touch upon, which Councillor Antrim has touched upon, the Mayor touched upon, you've made point about the unreserved, the earmarked reserves. We have promised that we will take you, or your leader, through that by and by. I've got to say that my side, when we were going through that and the difficulties that we had, felt that there could be room for taking money out of those reserves. But when we went through it, chapter of verse, saw what they were, there was very little. There was bits here and bits there to do that, because we cannot leave ourselves totally at the whims of whatever else happens with that. But overall, I believe that our capital expenditure, our capital programme is in the right thing to do. It has been in the right thing to do, and at this minute will continue to be the right thing to do. Oh, by the way, on the LOBO issue, the LOBO was settled. We always felt that we were on strong ground on that one. But can I just say again, that had we thought that that was going to come up, we may have had an earmarked reserve for it. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. We now move to the vote by a show of hands. Do Council approve the recommendation as detailed in the report? All those in favour, show their hands. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That now concludes the business of this meeting. May I now declare the meeting closed. 12:32. You can get through that one.